I used a simple trick to upgrade a lemon cake into the softest red velvet cake for a YouTube live demonstration, and surprisingly it worked. This cake turned out great, and all I did was I swapped the fresh lemon juice in an original lemon cake recipe for the same quantity of hot coffee and lemon zest for cocoa powder. All the other ingredients in the original lemon cake recipe remained the same for the red velvet cake, except for the addition of vinegar and red food coloring, both of which are staples associated with a red velvet cake. The result is this moist and soft textured cake with a delicate crumb that is flavorful and balanced in sweetness, making it a great pairing with any buttercream. This cake is also so beginner friendly that it could be derived using simple tools such as a hand mixer. So without having to waste your time, let's go check out what we did on the live. I'm turning a lemon cake recipe fully into a red velvet cake. The reason being, to develop recipes you have to have some understanding of what you call ingredient ratios. So the ratios of ingredients have to marry to give you your end result in terms of your dry ingredients, your liquid and fats and all sorts that are proportionally measured and adapted to marry together to create you the cake. So as a result, if you have a simple understanding of the ratios of ingredients, you can pick one cake recipe and make small adaptation for great result for a whole complete different cake. So let's start with our ingredient. The good thing is that this recipe is super beginner friendly, because I'm going to be making the recipe out of a hand mixer here. Alright, so the lemon cake recipe uses the reverse creaming method. So let's talk through the ingredient first, the intention behind them, how they affect my results, and then I'll move to telling you about the method that I will be employing. So over here I have myself some room temperature butter, except it's hard. I just cut them from frozen a little bit and they are still hard. So I will be softening that in the microwave, but that's about 120 grams of butter here. And with the butter we have self-raising flour. In the UK we do self-raising flour, which means that the flour comes with rising agents added to it already, so you don't need to add baking powder or baking soda, but depending on the recipe you can add a bit to kind of give it some lift, and I'll be adding a little bit of that. I think half a teaspoonful will help me. And then we have some sugar here. The sugar is about 320 grams, I believe. We have 385 grams. Look, I try to remember the exact recipe quantities just so that they are useful for you if you're watching and you want to take notes. However, I'll leave details in the description box, and the only reason they are relevant right now is because this is the exact amount of recipe ingredients that are used in the lemon cake. So I just want to remember them just so that I can confirm. And then we have about 120 mils of oil here. We have buttermilk. Now if I was just making the lemon cake, I would have a bit of lemon zest, maybe about 2 tablespoonfuls, which is about 6 lemons that are zested, and then about 60 mils of freshly squeezed lemon juice. Of course we don't have that, so in place of the lemon I am going to be using coffee, which is about 60 mils, and then I'm going to be replacing the zest in this case. Not that one is for the other, but we have cocoa powder for the red velvet cake, and then I have some red food coloring. So let's talk method and ingredients, how they marry here. I am going to be using the reverse creaming method. If you've been on this channel, you know I have a red velvet cake recipe here. It is adaptable, it's super beginner friendly. I have made the original recipe and adapted it to be flavorful using oil and brown sugar, enhancing the flavor for you to enjoy, especially if you don't like the super sweetness but enjoy a kick of taste and flavor. I'll leave that in the description box, but this is the reverse creamy method. And the good thing about the reverse creamy method, simplistically comparing it to the creamy method, and just in case you don't know what the creamy method is, the creamy method is normally when you have the fat creamed with the sugar. In this case, the sugar crystals dig air pockets into the batter, creating air pockets, which helps the structure and rise of the cake, amongst many things. That is the simplistic way of explaining that. But the reverse creaming does the opposite by actually introducing the fat into the flour, and what that does is that it coats the flour with the fat, slowing down the production of gluten, which means that air pockets are considerably reduced whilst also creating a very stable and steady structure, which is super delicate and velvety. Depending on the recipe from which you derive the cake, you could have a slightly dense cake, but it is super nice with a great mouthfeel. When I derived that for the lemon cake, smash hit. So we're going to be mixing the fat into the flour, and the use of buttermilk here is going to add a tangy kick to the red velvet cake, which is a staple because it brings some sort of acid tangy flavor to your red velvet, but actually has the job of also tenderizing and slowing down gluten, which means that you have a very tender crumb to your bake. Now, oil here. Why am I using oil and fat together? You could choose oil altogether, you could melt your butter, and you could actually use fat altogether without the oil. Why am I using half and half? I'm using half and half simply because I want to bring some flavor from the batter to the cake, whilst also employing the properties that oil brings. Oil adds to the texture, adds moisture, and tenderizes the cake. And because oil doesn't set like butter would, at room temperature you have a more delicate, moist looking cake crumb. So I am employing that to bring all of the goodness of the oil, but also almost using the flavor of butter to enhance the texture and overall crumb and taste of the cake. Now I have some cocoa powder. The substitute I was going to make directly here is that I am going to be replacing the lemon juice, which is 60 ml, with a hot boiling cup of 60 ml, exact quantity of coffee. So I'll be deriving that in the process. In the meantime, we've talked about the ingredient. Well, one last thing, we have vinegar. I normally employ cider vinegar, but today I have clear vinegar. You'll see how I use that in a moment. And I will also be adding a pinch of bicarbonate of soda, which also reacts with the buttermilk here to tenderize and also give my cake a good rise. I don't know why my brain is glitching, but it's 9:30. I've been up since 7 a.m. this morning and my day has been go. I'm extremely tired, so I hope you can forgive me for the glitches, but my hope is to bring you all the information about this recipe. So without having to kind of bang on, let's get our butters a little softer than we have it here. I'm just going to put it in the microwave. I got it now, exactly how I want it. Right, there we go. Vicky, thank you. Vicky is in the chat and Vicky is helping with keeping the chat going. We're turning a lemon cake recipe into a red velvet cake. So for starters, I am just going to add the flour, the sugar and the butter together. And I don't want the flour to kind of jump at me. As you can see, I don't have my apron and I feel a little bit naked without it, because that's how you get a splatter of flour everywhere. So I am just going to mix that in slowly. Now that we have our butter and dry ingredients mixed with the sugar in here, I am just going to slowly just mix it. And what you're looking for is for everything to come together and look like a sandy consistency. Okay, right. Maybe it would have been a good thing to do this in the beginner friendly stand mixer, but hey, I wanted you to see the result of this, so I'm not mad about what I've done here. But what we're looking at here is a rather sandy consistency, if you see what I mean. It's super sandy. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to add the oil. Now I think when I was talking about the recipes ingredients, I actually forgot the eggs. We know what eggs do in baking. Eggs add moisture, tenderizes, and also binds, right? So we have 5 eggs here, 5 large eggs, measures about, is it 230, 240, something like that. So we have about 230 to 250, I think. But I'll leave the correct measurement in the... Now, what we are looking at here is like a pie crusty like consistency. It's very sandy, and that's because the oil has kind of coated everything. So we have a rather sandy texture here, which I will leave to the side for a minute whilst we mix the other ingredients together. Now, the first ingredient we have to consider here is the eggs. Right, so I'm going to get the eggs in first, and I'm going to mix that with the buttermilk. And into that is going to go a tablespoonful of vinegar. Now, with all of that, I am going to just heat the egg. Right. Before I do anything, I am going to measure the 60 mils of hot coffee, because that should come really handy. Five mils and 10, right? 10 grams of coffee, that's a spoonful, and we need 60. Right, got that. And what the coffee is going to do is, because this the recipe is going to have a touch of cocoa powder, which is what is required in red velvet. The hot coffee is going to enhance the hint of the chocolate to come through and settle properly in the recipe, whilst also equally blooming the cocoa in the recipe. So it kind of brings a good texture and tenderizing effect to all of it. So I have a full tablespoonful and 2 of cocoa, and what I am going to do here is add the coffee just to loosen the batter up whilst blooming the cocoa, and I'm mixing all that. And the next thing that goes in, because you want to be careful when you're mixing this together, because once the hot coffee touches the eggs, it might cook it, right? Now I am mixing all this together. It looks a bit messy and doesn't look anything like a red velvet cake, but trust the process, okay? Now we are going to put some red food coloring. Now the subject of food coloring in red velvet cakes is a hot and contested subject. I am not here to answer questions on that. I am just adding red to my red velvet cake. You follow your own guidelines on the subject, and that's all I am going to say about it. But I'll leave details in the description box for you who needs to know a bit more. That's how we are turning our red velvet cake. Look at that butter. It has come together, hasn't it? But the butter is looking a little bit lumpy over here. So let's try and get our mixer into action and mix this. Believe me when I say trust the process, because girl, if you see, okay, if you see the butter is giving. Can you see? The butter is giving red. But you know what? We are not done yet. We have to remember, this whole thing is it's an experiment. If it doesn't work, we'll see. So let's add half a teaspoonful of soda bicarb in there, and that's it. Because we already have self-raising flour to use in here, I don't want to add any more than we need. And that's our butter. So I have already gone ahead and lined my pan. You can see I lined it with a small baking parchment, a round baking parchment, and I've also floured in there, just extra guarantee so I don't have the cake sticking in there. And as a result, we are going to split this into two 8-inch tins. If this yields similar results to the lemon cake that I made, I will be one happy baker, because that lemon cake was amazing. And guess what? I was here shouting about wanting to go give it to some ambulance people. I tell you who ended up with the lemon cake? My neighbors, and they were happy with that, and the postman, well, the postwoman. The tip is that if you want to know if the butter is any good, taste it, and if the butter tastes good by itself raw, it is going to be good for the cake. So let's see. I like the flavor of this. It is a little intense, there's a kick to it, but we are done here. So what you want to do is make sure that your oven is functioning, and it is going to guarantee you best result. Great tip I have over here, I'll tell you. This is my tip for evenly baked cakes. Now we already know the cake itself is going to yield us a very tender and even textured crumb without air pockets in it. It's very velvety, but we also want it to have a very even and less crusty crust on it, because when the heat in the oven bakes the cake dry, baking is what you call dry cooking. If you put that in, it will bake no problem, but if you want to get an extra tenderness to your cake, put some water in the oven. And if I put water in the oven, what it does is that it cools the air that moves in the oven, which means I have a very steady, slower cooking process, guaranteeing me a soft, tender bake that is more even and little less crusty. Let's go and have our cake in, and then we'll see. This should bake about 55 minutes to an hour. Right, so there you go, in the middle of the oven, and there you go. Cakes have been baking for 40 minutes. Let's check and get it out. I promise you, this is the quickest and simplest red velvet cake recipe I have derived, and I'm already loving the look of it. First of all, let's have a look at the appearance. Can you see what I see? Can you see? Right. Now, remember, I did bang on about what method I am using, why I am deriving those methods. So let's go and check for all of that. What I am doing is I am using the spatula to pry the cake from the side so they don't stick. Okay, 3, 2, 1, there you go. Wow, it's super tender. We turned our lemon cake recipe to a complete red velvet cake. The crumb is very delicate.